There comes a moment in every life when excuses grow tired, when explanations lose their power, and when a quiet inner voice begins to speak with uncommon clarity. It does not shout, it does not beg. It simply states the truth. That truth is this: your life will not change by wishful thinking, by hoping someone notices your potential, or by waiting for conditions to improve. Your life changes the instant you decide to change it. Not because it is easy, not because it is convenient, but because it is necessary. Most people spend their days saying, I wish, or I hope, or someday. But progress does not respond to wishes. Progress responds to decisions. The moment you say, I can, you acknowledge possibility. The moment you say, I will, you declare intent. And the moment you say, I must, you cross a line where retreat is no longer acceptable. That is where lives are rebuilt, fortunes are formed, and ordinary individuals rise to uncommon standards. You do not need more time. You do not need more permission. You do not need someone else to believe in you first. What you need is a firm internal resolve that your future deserves better than your past habits. Because when necessity takes over, procrastination loses its grip. When standards rise, excuses fall away. And when you finally understand that your life is your responsibility, everything begins to shift. Your thinking, your actions, and ultimately, your results. This is not about motivation for a moment. It is about commitment for a lifetime. It is about deciding that no matter how many times you fall short, you will stand back up with stronger reasons and higher expectations. Because the day you stop negotiating with your potential is the day you begin to command your destiny. Personal responsibility is the starting point of all meaningful progress because it places the power of change back into the hands of the individual where it has always belonged. The moment a person accepts that their current results are largely the outcome of their past choices, attitudes, and actions, something profound happens internally. They stop waiting for rescue. They stop blaming circumstances, systems, parents, governments, luck, or timing. Instead, they begin to see life as a direct response to who they are becoming. This is not a burden, it is liberation, because responsibility is the doorway to control, and control is the foundation of growth. Many people resist personal responsibility because it feels uncomfortable at first. It demands honesty, and honesty requires courage. It is far easier to explain away poor results than to examine personal habits. But explanations do not produce progress. Only discipline does. The truth is that life does not reward intention, it rewards behavior. Once a person understands that every neglected skill, every wasted hour, every avoided decision has a cost, they also begin to understand that every small improvement has a return. Responsibility sharpens awareness. It forces a person to ask better questions, not why did this happen to me? But what could I have done differently? That shift alone elevates thinking from victimhood to leadership. Taking responsibility also builds self-respect. When an individual knows that they are accountable for their outcomes, they begin to operate with higher standards. They show up earlier. They prepare more thoroughly. They speak with greater intention and listen with greater focus. They understand that promises made to others mean little if promises made to themselves are routinely broken. Over time, this alignment between word and action builds inner confidence, the kind that does not depend on applause or approval. It is the quiet confidence of knowing that effort will be applied regardless of mood, and that commitments will be honored regardless of inconvenience. Personal responsibility also eliminates the dangerous habit of waiting. Waiting for motivation, waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for someone else to change first. A responsible person understands that action precedes clarity, not the other way around. They know that confidence is built by doing difficult things repeatedly, not by thinking about them. They accept that failure is not a verdict on their worth, but feedback on their strategy. This mindset transforms setbacks into instruction rather than discouragement. Each mistake becomes a lesson, each delay a reminder, each obstacle a training ground for character. When responsibility becomes a personal philosophy, life begins to respond differently. Relationships improve because expectations are clearer and communication becomes more honest. Careers advance because reliability becomes a reputation. Health improves because daily choices are no longer negotiated away in moments of weakness. Even external challenges lose their power to derail progress because the individual no longer depends on ideal conditions to act. They understand that discipline is strongest when circumstances are weakest. At its core, personal responsibility is the decision to stop living by reaction and start living by design. It is the understanding that while you may not control everything that happens to you, you do control how you respond, what you learn, and who you become as a result. That understanding changes the tone of a life, because when a person accepts full ownership of their direction, they no longer ask life for permission to succeed. They begin giving themselves instructions and following through consistently day after day. The exception, the power of decision over circumstance is one of the most underestimated forces in human environment, because most people, they're rather than allowing to dictate their behavior, rather than allowing their choices to fit their environment. Circumstances are neutral. They carry no meaning until a decision assigns them one. Two people can face the same limitation, the same setback, the same disadvantage, and walk away with entirely different futures, not because one was luckier, but because one decided differently. Decision is the moment where thought becomes direction and direction becomes destiny. Many individuals spend their lives waiting for circumstances to improve before they commit to improvement themselves. They tell themselves they will act when they feel confident, when they have more resources, when the timing is perfect. But circumstances rarely announce their readiness. They remain uncertain, imperfect, and often inconvenient. The individual who understands the power of decision recognizes that clarity does not precede action, it follows it. Once a firm decision is made, energy aligns, focus sharpens, and opportunities begin to appear that were previously invisible. The external world does not change first. The internal posture does. A true decision is not a preference or a wish dressed up with hopeful language. It is a line drawn in the mind that eliminates alternatives. When a person decides, they stop negotiating with distractions and stop entertaining escape routes. Circumstances may argue, but the decision holds. Fatigue may whisper, but the decision stands. Doubt may appear, but the decision remains in control. This is why decision is more powerful than motivation, because motivation fluctuates with emotion, while decision is anchored in identity and standards. When circumstances dominate, people live reactively. Their moods are shaped by weather, news, opinions, and past experiences. But when decision dominates, life becomes proactive. The individual chooses how they will show up regardless of conditions. They decide in advance what level of effort is acceptable, what behaviors are non-negotiable, and what standards must be met. This eliminates wasted energy because the mind is no longer debating what to do. The decision has already been made, and action becomes a matter of execution rather than deliberation. Decision also reframes adversity. Instead of asking why a challenge exists, the individual asks how it can be used. Pressure becomes refinement. Resistance becomes strength training. Delay becomes preparation. This does not mean circumstances lose their difficulty, but they lose their authority. They no longer dictate emotional responses or determine self-worth. The individual understands that while circumstances can influence the path, they do not control the direction unless permission is granted. Over time, a pattern emerges. Each firm decision builds self-trust. Each follow-through reinforces belief. The person begins to see themselves as someone who acts decisively rather than someone who hesitates. This identity shift is critical because behavior follows self-image. A decisive person does not wait for permission to grow. They move and adjust along the way. They understand that mistakes are often the price of momentum and that inaction carries a far greater cost. The power of decision over circumstance ultimately comes down to sovereignty over one's life. It is the refusal to surrender internal authority to external conditions. When a person decides who they will be, how they will act, and what they will pursue, circumstances become secondary. They may slow progress, but they cannot stop it. They may challenge resolve, but they cannot break it. Because once a decision is made at the level of identity, circumstances are reduced to variables and progress becomes inevitable through persistence and disciplined action repeated regardless of comfort or approval. Self-belief as a discipline rather than a feeling is a concept that separates from those who make consistent progress from those who live in cycles of enthusiasm and disappointment. Feelings are unstable by nature. They rise and fall based on sleep, stress, praise, criticism, and countless external influences. If belief is tied to emotion, it becomes unreliable. One good day produces confidence. One bad moment erases it. Discipline, on the other hand, is steady. It does not ask how you feel before it acts. It operates on principle, routine, and commitment. And when self-belief is trained in this way, it becomes durable rather than fragile. Most people wait to feel confident before they act, not realizing that confidence is a byproduct of action taken consistently over time. The disciplined approach reverses this pattern. Instead of asking, "Do I believe in myself today?" the individual asks, "What is required of me today?" Action is taken first, and belief is reinforced afterward. Each completed task, each uncomfortable effort, each kept promise becomes evidence. Over time, this evidence accumulates into an unshakable internal certainty that is no longer dependent on mood or immediate results. Treating self-belief as a discipline means practicing it daily, especially when conditions are unfavorable. It means showing up when energy is low, when progress is slow, and when recognition is absent. It is the decision to behave in alignment with one's potential, even when the mind is offering reasons to retreat. This form of belief is quiet and serious. It does not announce itself loudly or seek validation. It is demonstrated through preparation, consistency, and the willingness to endure discomfort without dramatizing it. Discipline-based belief also changes the internal dialogue. Instead of indulging in self-doubt, the individual learns to redirect attention to standards and responsibilities. Doubt may still appear, but it is not given authority. It is acknowledged and then overridden by action. This trains the mind to understand that belief is not a prerequisite for movement. Movement is the training ground for belief. Each time action is taken in spite of uncertainty, the individual strengthens their capacity to trust themselves under pressure. Another critical aspect of disciplined self-belief is the refusal to personalize temporary failure. When belief is emotional, failure feels like an identity attack. When belief is disciplined, failure is treated as data. It informs adjustment, not self-condemnation. This allows progress to continue without emotional collapse. The individual understands that competence is built through repetition, not perfection. And that belief grows stronger when one persists long enough to develop skill. Over time, this approach reshapes identity. The person no longer sees themselves as someone who needs to feel ready, inspired, or fearless. They see themselves as someone who acts responsibly regardless of internal resistance. This identity is powerful because it is rooted in behavior rather than hope. It produces calm under pressure, patience during delay, and resilience in the face of challenge. When self-belief becomes a discipline, it removes dependency on external encouragement. Praise becomes appreciated but unnecessary. Criticism becomes information rather than injury. The individual carries their own approval through adherence to personal standards. This internal authority is what allows sustained growth over years rather than short bursts of effort. It ensures that progress continues when excitement fades and that momentum is maintained through routine, structure, and follow-through. In this way, belief is no longer something you wait for. It is something you practice daily through deliberate action until it becomes an ingrained part of who you are and how you operate regardless of circumstance or emotion. Commitment that outlasts motivation is the defining trait of individuals who achieve long-term success rather than short-lived bursts of progress. Motivation is an emotional spark. It is useful, inspiring, and often powerful, but it is also temporary. It rises when conditions are favorable and fades when resistance appears. Those who rely on motivation alone find themselves starting repeatedly, but rarely finishing. Commitment, however, is a decision anchored in values and standards, not feelings. And once it is made, it carries a person forward even when enthusiasm has disappeared. True commitment begins when the novelty wears off. In the early stages of any pursuit, energy is high and effort feels light. But eventually repetition sets in, progress slows, and discomfort becomes more frequent. This is the point where motivation steps aside and commitment must take control. A committed individual does not ask whether they feel like continuing. They have already decided that continuation is required. The work becomes routine rather than dramatic, and discipline replaces excitement as the driving force. Commitment also establishes non-negotiables. When a person is merely motivated, they negotiate with inconvenience. When a person is committed, they adjust everything else around their obligation. Time is reorganized, priorities are clarified, and excuses lose credibility. Commitment removes the daily debate about whether to act. which conserves mental energy and increases consistency. The individual understands that consistency, not intensity, is what compounds over time. Another critical aspect of enduring commitment is the willingness to operate without immediate reward. Motivation thrives on quick feedback and visible progress. Commitment is comfortable with delay. It understands that meaningful results often come after long periods of unseen effort. This patience is not passive, it is active endurance. The individual continues to show up, refine their skills, and uphold standards even when results are minimal, trusting that effort applied long enough will eventually produce a return. Commitment also stabilizes identity. A motivated person says, "I am trying." A committed person says, "This is who I am." Identity-driven commitment changes behavior at a foundational level because actions are no longer optional. They are expressions of self. When setbacks occur, the committed individual does not question whether to continue. They only question how to continue more effectively. This prevents emotional withdrawal and keeps momentum intact during difficult periods. Over time, commitment builds resilience. Each day of follow-through strengthens the individual's tolerance for discomfort and uncertainty. Tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Challenges that once caused hesitation become expected parts of the process. The person becomes mentally tougher, not through dramatic effort, but through steady exposure to responsibility. This resilience creates a quiet confidence that does not depend on external validation or constant encouragement. Commitment that outlasts motivation also reshapes one's relationship with failure. Instead of interpreting failure as a reason to stop, it becomes a signal to refine approach and increase discipline. The individual understands that quitting is not a solution. It is a surrender of potential. By staying committed through imperfection, they allow time to work in their favor, turning early struggles into later competence. In the end, commitment is the force that carries a person through the ordinary days, the difficult days, and the days when progress feels invisible. It is what ensures that effort continues after inspiration fades, and that growth persists long after excitement has passed. When commitment becomes the governing principle, success stops being a matter of mood and becomes a matter of character, expressed through daily action and sustained responsibility over time without compromise. The cost of delay versus the reward of action is a reality that quietly shapes the direction of most lives, often without conscious awareness. Delay feels harmless in the moment. It disguises itself as caution, preparation, or the need for better timing. But beneath that surface, delay accumulates interest, and the longer it persists, the more expensive it becomes. Opportunities do not disappear dramatically. They fade slowly as skills remain undeveloped, habits remain unchanged, and time continues moving forward without negotiation. Every delay carries a hidden cost. Skills not practiced weaken. Confidence not exercised erodes. Momentum once lost becomes harder to regain. What begins as postponement often evolves into a pattern, and patterns eventually form identity. A person who repeatedly delays begins to see themselves as someone who hesitates, someone who waits, someone who needs certainty before action. This self-perception reinforces inaction, creating a cycle where potential remains unused not because it is absent, but because it is continually deferred. In contrast, action produces immediate and long long-term rewards, even when outcomes are imperfect. The first reward of action is clarity. Movement reveals information that thought alone cannot provide. Problems become specific instead of abstract. Fear becomes measurable instead of imagined. With each step taken, uncertainty decreases and confidence increases, not because success is guaranteed, but because capability is being exercised. Action builds familiarity with challenge, and familiarity reduces intimidation. Delay also compounds regret. The longer action is postponed, the heavier the emotional weight becomes. People rarely regret trying and failing as deeply as they regret never trying at all. Unused potential creates a quiet dissatisfaction that lingers beneath daily routines. Over time, this dissatisfaction hardens into frustration, not with circumstances, but with oneself. This internal conflict drains energy and weakens resolve, making future action feel even more difficult. The reward of action, on the other hand, extends beyond external results. Each decisive step strengthens self-trust. Each effort, regardless of outcome, becomes evidence that the individual is capable of moving forward despite uncertainty. This internal reward is cumulative. Over time, it reshapes identity from someone who waits to someone who acts. That identity shift has far-reaching effects, influencing how challenges are approached, how opportunities are evaluated, and how setbacks are processed. Delay often masquerades as the pursuit of perfection. People tell themselves they are waiting to be ready, waiting for the right conditions, waiting for confidence to arrive. But readiness is not a prerequisite for progress. It is a product of engagement. The individual who acts imperfectly learns faster than the one who waits flawlessly. Action accelerates learning, while delay prolongs ignorance. The reward of action is growth, and growth is the true currency of long-term success. Time also plays a decisive role in this equation. Time rewards action and punishes delay. Small efforts applied early compound into significant outcomes, while the same efforts applied later must work against accumulated disadvantage. This is true in skill development, health, relationships, and personal discipline. The earlier action is taken, the less force is required to change direction. The longer delay persists, the more effort is needed just to return to neutral. Understanding the cost of delay creates urgency, but not panic. It produces a calm seriousness about the use of time. The individual recognizes that waiting for perfect conditions is a losing strategy, and that progress favors those who are willing to begin before they feel fully prepared. When action becomes the default response, momentum builds naturally, and momentum simplifies everything. Decisions become easier, confidence becomes steadier, and progress becomes predictable through consistency. Ultimately, the choice between delay and action is the choice between comfort now and strength later. Delay protects the ego in the short term, but weakens the future. Action challenges the present, but strengthens the long term. Those who understand this principle do not rush blindly, but they do move decisively, knowing that imperfect action today is almost always more valuable than perfect intention postponed indefinitely, while time continues forward without pause or sympathy. Identity-driven behavior and standards determine the ceiling of a person's life far more than talent, opportunity, or external pressure ever will. People do not consistently rise to the level of their goals. They consistently fall to the level of their identity. How someone sees themselves quietly governs what they tolerate, what they attempt, and what they repeatedly do. When behavior is driven by identity rather than circumstance, actions become stable, predictable, and aligned with long-term growth instead of short-term comfort. Most inconsistency comes from a mismatch between goals and self-image. A person may want success, discipline, or excellence, but if they internally identify as someone who quits, procrastinates, or settles, their behavior will eventually return to that familiar standard. Standards are not rules imposed from the outside. They are expressions of identity. What a person believes they deserve and who they believe they are will always shape what they accept as normal. When standards are low, effort becomes optional. When standards are high, discipline becomes natural. Identity-driven behavior removes the need for constant motivation because actions are no longer negotiated daily. A person who identifies as disciplined does not debate whether to act. They act because that is what disciplined people do. A person who identifies as responsible does not wait for reminders. They prepare in advance. This internal alignment simplifies decision-making and conserves mental energy. The individual is not forcing themselves to behave a certain way. They are simply expressing who they believe themselves to be. Standards act as personal laws. They determine how much effort is acceptable, how much integrity is required, and how much discomfort is tolerated. When standards are clearly defined, excuses lose power. External conditions may influence difficulty, but they do not lower expectations. The individual understands that lowering standards to match circumstances is a form of self-betrayal. Instead, they raise their capacity to meet the standard. This is how character is built, not through dramatic moments, but through consistent adherence to personal rules, even when no one is watching. Identity-driven behavior also changes how setbacks are interpreted. Failure does not threaten identity. It challenges methods. The individual does not say, "This means I am not capable," but instead says, "This means I must adjust," because their identity is anchored in growth and responsibility. Quitting is not an option under consideration. Persistence becomes automatic, not heroic. The person continues because stopping would violate who they believe they are. Another powerful aspect of identity-based standards is self-respect. When actions align with identity, self-respect increases. When actions violate identity, internal tension appears. High performers are not immune to temptation. They are simply unwilling to repeatedly disappoint themselves. This internal accountability is stronger than external pressure because it operates continuously. Over time, this builds trust with oneself, which is one of the most valuable forms of confidence. The individual knows they will follow through because history proves it. As identity strengthens, behavior becomes increasingly consistent across environments. The person does not require supervision, reminders, or applause to maintain standards. Whether conditions are favorable or hostile, routine or chaotic, behavior remains anchored. This reliability compounds over time, creating reputations, opportunities, and results that appear impressive from the outside, but are simply the byproduct of internal alignment maintained over years. Ultimately, identity-driven behavior is about deciding in advance who you are committed to being and then living in agreement with that decision daily. When standards are rooted in identity, they no longer feel restrictive, they feel stabilizing. They remove confusion, reduce regret, and provide direction when emotions fluctuate. A person who lives this way does not chase outcomes blindly. They build character deliberately, knowing that outcomes inevitably follow the standards they refuse to compromise and the identity they consistently reinforce through disciplined action and personal responsibility expressed. Make urgency rooted in purpose rather than pressure is what allows pressure to the person to move decisively without living in a state of anxiety or burnout. Say anxiety or burnout. Pressure-driven urgency comes from fear, comparison, deadlines imposed by others, or the need to prove something quickly. It creates frantic action, scattered focus, and emotional exhaustion. Purpose-driven urgency, by contrast, is calm, steady, and deeply personal. It does not rush, but it does not delay. It moves with intention because it is guided by meaning rather than stress. When urgency is driven by pressure, actions are reactive. People act because they feel chased by time, expectations, or consequences. This type of urgency often leads to shortcuts, compromised standards, and inconsistent effort. Once the pressure eases, so does the discipline. Purpose-based urgency works differently. It comes from a clear understanding of why the work matters. The individual is not running away from fear, but moving toward a vision. This creates consistency because the reason for action does not disappear when conditions change. Purpose clarifies priorities. When someone knows why they are doing what they are doing, they waste less time on distractions that do not align with their long-term direction. Urgency becomes selective. Not everything feels important, but the right things feel non-negotiable. This prevents burnout because energy is invested where it counts most. The individual is not trying to do everything fast. They are committed to doing the essential things now rather than later. Another defining feature of purpose-driven urgency is patience paired with momentum. The person understands that meaningful goals take time, but they also understand that time should not be wasted. There is no panic, only resolve. Each day is treated as valuable, not because it is scarce in a frightening way, but because it is meaningful. This creates a rhythm of steady progress where effort is applied daily without emotional spikes or collapses. Urgency rooted in purpose also strengthens resilience. When obstacles appear, the individual does not interpret them as signals to slow down indefinitely. They adjust, adapt, and continue. Pressure-based urgency often collapses under resistance, but purpose-based urgency becomes stronger when tested. Challenges reinforce the importance of the goal rather than undermining it. The individual is reminded why they started and recommits with greater clarity. This type of urgency also protects integrity. Because the motivation is internal, there is less temptation to compromise values for speed. The individual understands that reaching a goal at the cost of character is failure disguised as success. Purpose keeps standards intact, while urgency keeps momentum alive. Together, they create progress that is both effective and sustainable. Purpose-driven urgency also eliminates the illusion of unlimited time. Without becoming obsessive or fearful, the individual accepts that opportunities have windows and that potential must be acted upon to be realized. This awareness sharpens focus. Procrastination becomes harder to justify because the work is tied to something meaningful rather than optional. The individual does not wait for perfect conditions because the purpose itself creates enough reason to begin. Over time, this form of urgency becomes a defining trait. The person is known for steady execution reliability, and forward movement. They are not frantic, but they are rarely stagnant. They respect time without being controlled by it. Each day is approached with intention, not pressure, and progress becomes a natural byproduct of alignment between values and action. Urgency rooted in purpose ultimately creates a sense of quiet seriousness about life. The individual understands that their time, energy, and potential deserve to be used well. They are not rushing to impress, compete, or escape discomfort. They are moving because their work matters to them. This internal drive sustains effort through difficulty, guards against distraction, and ensures that action continues, even when no one is watching, because purpose does not need an audience to remain powerful